Okay, so what we're going to demonstrate now is we're going to use tissue paper to show texture on the paper. So very similarly to the salt, the way we're going to get texture using the tissue paper is the tissue paper, while it's laying into the wet paint, it's going to suction up the wet paint. So it's going to leave the negative space so we can see a little bit more of the paper, less of the paint. Right? And it's also going to leave wet paint around the edges of where the tissue paper is laying down, so we'll get some like geometric looking shapes that way as well. So before you can start painting, what you want to do is you want to rip up some tissue paper into smaller sections, because we're going to lay down bits of tissue paper while it's still wet. All right, so we're going to do that as we paint. We're going to paint, lay down tissue paper, paint, lay down tissue paper until our entire paper is full. So what I like to do to get my tissue paper to look more texturing is I like to fold it, or you could just very fancy like just crumple it up like so, just to get it a little bit more angular. When you lay it down, you want tissue paper to be touching the paper and tissue paper to be away, right? Imagine if you were just like lay down a flat piece of tissue paper and it was all laying down in the paint. You're not going to get much texture because it's just going to suction up all the paint. So you want bits that are going to touch it and bits that stand away from the drying paint. Now I'm going to open it up a little bit because I am going to lay it down. Okay, so now I'm ready to paint. I'm going to use my first piece of tissue paper, and I'm going to push down those spots that are already close to my paper. So I'm basically just kind of like letting the natural shape, it's not quite natural, I did crumple it up myself, but the shape of the tissue paper that is now the shape of the tissue paper because I crumpled it up. So I'm going to let those sections that are closer to the paper touch my wet paint. Okay. If you have some things, like if it's popping up and you want to be a little bit more forceful with it, you can use some rocks to lay it down as well. These are just perfect. So I'm going to lay these down in those areas that it's touching the paint, so it kind of weights it down, and then you don't have to worry about it while you're painting, like bumping on it, because we do want the tissue paper to be fairly still, because we have to let the wet paint and the tissue paper join in and absorb and dry the same way that they're placed down. So now I'm going to keep going. I want some more color in here. So yeah, setting it down, letting those areas that are closer, you can push them down. I like to keep it kind of spread out with the areas that are being pushed down. Like I'm not going to push down like this whole section. I'm going to push down over here and over here. So I'm spacing out those areas that are closer and far away from the wet paint. Take some lighter purple, just drop it in here and let it kind of blossom into that blue paint while it's still wet. So if I'm wanting to like just drop little bits of purple in here, that blue must be wet or else it's not going to like settle and dissolve into that blue. That's a really fun watercolor technique. It's bleeding the paint. I'm going to really push this one down and see how we like that as well. So I'm kind of just letting those closer sections group together a little bit more over here so we can see the difference between the texture. All right, so we're going to take off our marbles and see how this tissue paper technique went. So I'm going to take all of it off first. Don't want to lose my marbles. Over here. These are actually flat, just so you know they're not like round marbles. So don't put any round objects on here while it's drying. It's just gonna fall off. All right, I want to carefully take this off like it's a Band-Aid. Actually, you rip Band-Aids kind of fast. Don't do it too fast. Do it like it's a very delicate Band-Aid. And you're seeing these areas that have panned the tissue paper. You're seeing what that tissue paper absorbed off. And that's looking really cool. This one has a very hard edge. So that's going to be interesting. Ooh, awesome. It almost feels like styrofoam. A colorful, weird styrofoam. Or not styrofoam, that's not what I meant to say. Plastic wrap. So different from each other. Cool. Awesome. So that creates a very, I was thinking it might be very geometric, but it almost feels like a mix between like those geometric lines and the organicness of like, that maybe when I like bunched up the tissue paper a little bit differently. So this is great. I would use this for water. Feels really cool. So I'm like picturing like maybe putting like fishes in here, so I could see like that being very like an aquatic scene. This is great for rocks. Like rocks are very like geometric and organic at the same time. So using this for rocks and like accentuating like these lines, bringing in some darker values, that could be really good for. This can also be very abstract too. So it's really fun to just use this technique and just use it non-objectively at first, which means like not to represent something, but then get inspired by what happens when you pull it off. Like I was just inspired by thinking this looked very aquatic, so putting on some fishes on there could end up objective, but I was inspired by the non-objectiveness that it started out as. So yeah, tissue paper is a great way to start a painting.